Okay, and it looks like we are live. Great. Hi, I'm Bob Boross, and this is my YouTube video channel. This is my jazz and tap dance life, and we talk about lots of things related to jazz dance, tap dance, whether it's history or instruction or choreography. And this is part of a series I'm doing called Preserving the Jazz Dance Heritage. And I'm trying to look at people who have worked in jazz dance from a while back and how they're taking those classic ideas, using them in their new work today. And in the past, I've interviewed a lot of people who were from a while ago. This time we have somebody who's from today, who's still drawing some from those older ideas and bringing them forward. So we're going to be talking with Al Blackstone, who is a prominent choreographer and teacher in New York, all across America, and doing many of his own shows right now. And that's a great thing for jazz dance too. So he's on the line. We're going to bring him in right now. There he is. Hi, Al.
Hi, Bob.
How are you?
I'm great, thank you. I'm very excited to be here to talk with you.
Great, thank you. I sort of knew of you because I'm from New Jersey and you're from New Jersey, and I had a studio in Red Bank, and your parents had a studio. Was it Brick or Bricktown?
Bricktown. Well, they call it Brick now, but when I grew up, it was Bricktown.
Yeah. So I basically was familiar, with them from those time periods, and now you've grown up in that dance studio, and you're doing many things in terms of dance and choreography. So that's a great way to starting in the dance studio like that. Is that something that you always wanted to do? Like you just started dancing and that was it? You just had the dancing bug?
I was always obviously surrounded by it. Everyone that my parents knew, and I mean, the dance studio was literally attached to our home. So it was something that was always around me, and I definitely enjoyed it, but I don't think I just really caught the bug until high school. Until my mom kind of sent me away to a dance camp. I was actually thinking about quitting dance. And she was like, why don't you try this summer intensive? And she sent me off, and I worked with, a couple of really great teachers like Frank Hatchett was there, who I'd known already, and Doug Caldwell, and this woman named Dale Lamb. And because I left the nest and went and started just learning dance outside of my home, I realized that I really loved it. So from then on, I decided that I wanted to kind of dedicate my life to it.
Okay, and why don't you give us your parents' names, your mom and dad?
Yes, my parents are Richard and Denise Blackstone. My mom's maiden name is Danelli. She's Sicilian, but the studio was called Denise Danielle Dance Studio.
Right. Yes, I remember that. Okay,
yeah,
wonderful.
You came and taught. Do you remember that you came and taught when I was in high school at my parents' dance studio? You taught a jazz class. Do you remember?
I remember coming there. That was just before I went to teach in California for many years. And I went there. Well, I also remember one thing too. I almost hired you.
Yes.
For a show. Actually, I had hired you.
Yes.
I did a big performance using music by Bruce Springsteen. It was all about 9/11. And you were hired, but then you got a great gig and said, Is that what
happened? Or I ended up moving to LA, I think, or something.
Yeah, there was something that you had to go, which is understandable.
It was my loss, clearly. Here we are now.
Yeah, it was a great show. Anyway, but we're talking about you here right now. Okay. So what are I can show some things as we go through it, but like what are some of the things that you're working on now? What is your career grown into? Like what is the things that encompass all of your jazz dance life right now?
Sure. I think that I've been very fortunate in that I've gotten to dabble in sort of different parts of the industry. I do a lot of theater, so I choreograph a lot of musicals, mostly regionally, sometimes off Broadway. And I also create my own work. So this last summer I had a show produced at the Joyce that was mostly jazz dance, but most of my work is story driven. So I like to make stories and tell them through dance. And then of course I do the show So You Think You Can Dance. I've done it for the last 7 seasons.
Great.
Every summer I go and I do that. And then that's in addition to the teaching that I do on dance conventions and here in New York City. So it's always a balance of professional work and teaching. I'm very passionate about both.
Okay, well, how did you get the gig with So You Think You Can Dance? Because that's pretty high profile.
Yeah, it was a pretty, I had a student from New Jersey, another Jersey guy named Jess Laprado, who was on the show, and I had worked with him from when he was, younger, and I choreographed a bunch of solos for him to use on the show. And so they got to know me there through that work. And then they come to New York every year and audition to choreographers, and I had auditioned for them. And then I got sent to Vietnam to do So You Think You Could Dance Vietnam, because I somehow ended up there. And it was very gradual over about 5 years. And then eventually they gave me a shot. And it's been a really great experience. Very positive for me.
Great. Well, that certainly is a high profile gig to make that happen. Okay, I'm just clicking a screen here now because I'm looking for something. I am going to bring in, let's see. Here we go. All right, so we're talking about, this is some photos that you supplied, but who is this guy right here?
So this is a gentleman named Charles Kelly, also known as Chuck Kelly. He was a very famous teacher he taught jazz, tap, and acrobatics, I believe, in New York City in the 1970s. And he was my parents' jazz teacher. They met in his class, and he was there. He trained them, really, everything that they know pretty much. So in retrospect, it's also everything that I kind of know came from this man. And he was also my godfather. He's sadly no longer with us, but yeah, this is Chuck. So when you think about, and I think about the roots of kind of my dance life, I think this is the man that really made my parents want to devote themselves to dance, and in turn open a school. So so that's really kind of the trunk of the tree as far as my dance roots go.
Right. And Chuck was one of those long-term teachers in New York. He dates even back to the late 1950s, and through the 1960s and 70s, he was super popular. He was the teacher to go to. And he taught at a studio called Farnworth and Hauer, which is right above the Ed Sullivan building. So you go right on the corner and go up to there, and of course Phil Black was down the street. But so this is interesting because even though you're doing So You Think You Can Dance, you're doing very contemporary things now. What you have underneath you dates way back to that time period in terms of some of the ideas and the technique and the movement style you may have.
Yes, 100%. And I'm finding now, especially at being a teacher, I think a product of all of these very historical classic jazz techniques and philosophies, but I haven't really taken ownership over it or really thought much about it. Right, it's sort of just naturally how I progressed, and I'm finding myself in a position now of really wanting to look back and know more about those techniques and know more about really how they came to be and what they mean and how they work. And so that's one of the reasons that I've been studying mathematics technique with you, Bob, recently.
That's right.
Which I didn't even realize is really that mathematics was a teacher of Chuck's. I had no idea until you told me that, which is sort of ironic, a roundabout way.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Okay. Let's continue on. What's this?
That's me teaching on Jump Dance Convention, where I teach musical theater jazz to kids and dance teachers, which I've been doing for since 2012.
Right. So this is kind of really showing, because we're just showing a photo of somebody who was influential to you, who was very popular 30 years ago, 40 years ago, and now you're working with these young kids here. So you're sort of taking some of those ideas and transferring them to these younger students.
Certainly trying, yes.
And what's this?
So this is the poster for my show, Freddie Falls in Love, which was at the Joyce this summer, and it ran for 2 weeks. And it was a story told through dance featuring about 16 performers, no dialogue. And the entire show follows the story of a young man who's had his heart broken and has to kind of put his life back together. And and it was a very, absolutely, I would consider it jazz-based. There was some contemporary movement in there, but really I would absolutely call it jazz dancing, but a narrative kind of jazz dancing. And of course, when I say jazz dancing, for me, most of the time I'm really relating that to theater jazz, theatrical jazz, the stuff really based on Jack Cole and the work of those people.
Right. Okay. So when you say you're doing a complete performance, without dialogue, just told through dance and storytelling. I mean, do you see yourself kind of in that same style as someone as Susan Stroman, who did Contact, or even Bob Fosse? Well, he still had dialogue and dancing, but there's somebody who's trying to do an entire concert based only in dance.
I think that my biggest influence in that kind of work has been Matthew Bourne from London. When I saw Swan Lake, my mom took me to see it when I was about 14. I mean, it completely changed the way that I saw dance. And I think ultimately made me want to be a choreographer. It really, really moved me. So yeah, I think Contact, I saw Contact when it opened. And interestingly enough, like I don't remember having much of a reaction to it. It wasn't until later when I saw Swan Lake that I thought, oh my gosh, I didn't even know that something like this was possible. Not to say that I didn't enjoy Contact, I did, but but I'd say if I had a biggest influence, it would be Matthew Bourne.
Okay, so here's another shot of you teaching, bringing these ideas to younger kids. And what's this shot here?
So this is a duet that I did this summer for So You Think You Can Dance, to a song called The Girl from Ipanema, which is by Nat King Cole and Gregory Porter. And these are two gentlemen, Gino and Bailey. And this is, I think, probably the most, sort of classic theatrical jazz that I've done on the show. It was very, very rooted in classic jazz style, and a blast to work on. The boys were so excellent. It's so interesting though, because how would I say it? You would think that these very contemporary young people would have a hard time adapting to the style, but it came so naturally to them, which I think is such a testament to how I think that a lot of classic jazz training does exist still. It's just not necessarily being called that, right? Like these guys, absolutely, just the way that they use their plie, the way that they syncopated their movement. It really, have to say, came naturally. Obviously, we worked on it, but you only rehearse these numbers for like 5 or 6 hours. It's kind of wild. Wow. Fast it happens. So, Bailey on the left here is a b-boy. He's more of a hip hop dancer, and Gino considers himself more of a contemporary dancer. But they both absolutely have roots in jazz training and style, because clearly their bodies picked up the movement so naturally.
Yeah. I also see a little bit of a link too with people who study in hip hop, because they understand how to get grounded, how to use isolation in their body, how to do impulses. They're just using it in a different musical sense, but the physical sense of it has a common root, as opposed to somebody who's strictly only ballet. They've got a whole different way of relating to what's going on.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I couldn't agree more. And of course, when we say contemporary now, I mean, whatever that, it's complicated to say what that means, but really a lot of that movement is rooted in jazz dance as well. All right. So then you're talking about jazz. I mean, jazz comes from jazz music. And the initial dance movements, they were very strongly linked together. So, I mean, like, do you think about jazz in a musical sense? In terms of when you're doing choreography, is it the movement first, or is there something where the music tells you to do something? No. And
how does that work for you?
The more that I sort of do my own research on what jazz dance is and where it comes from, and one of the things that's always a common thread is the connection to the music, and that it really comes from a relationship to the music. And 100% all of my work starts with the music first. Every once in a while I'll get an idea like, oh, I want to do a number about a library or something like that. But I have to find the right song to tell that story. And then once I find that music, everything is drawn from how I react to and respond to that music. So it's always music first for me. And and I do feel drawn towards classic jazz music and big band and standards, that sort of thing. But I certainly do not only work with that type of music. It kind of goes across the board.
Okay. Like, where do you get an idea from? I mean, is it only from the music, or are you walking down the street and you see something happen and then that gives you a little idea?
Yeah.
Because you're talking about storytelling, or do you just listen to the music and the music makes you invent a story?
It depends. I have lists of music that I think are interesting, that I would think just feel like there's a story inside of them. And sometimes I'll have a song and think there's a story in here. What can I do with it? And then I have to come up with a scenario myself. And sometimes, like I said, I'll have a scenario first, and I'll try to find the right song to match that scenario. It doesn't, there's not necessarily a one specific way to do it. And a lot of times I have an idea of what the story is, but I have to really figure it out in rehearsal. That's really the way the work is figuring out. A lot of times I have the beginning of a routine, but I don't have the middle and the end. And that's a lot of the work that I do, is figuring out. In some ways it's like writing. I consider myself a little bit of a writer in that sense, that I'm coming up with scenario and plot. You know, and I think that, so You Think You Can Dance was a good fit for me when it happened, because, you know, it's the kinds of work that I think people respond to on that show are pieces that are, you know, tell a story in a short amount of time. And I like solving that problem and having that challenge. Yeah, it's just something that I enjoy doing.
Okay. All right. I want to go forward a little bit to this photo here. Are we seeing this right now? Yes, we are. We've got some music playing. So you talk about this, but I'm going to go back and find where that music is coming from. Here we go. Okay, there we go. All right. Who is this?
So this is on the left. You have myself at probably age, I'd say 8 or 9. And then in the middle is Frank Hatchett. And on the right is my friend Choreographer, who I grew up dancing with. And we are at the Broadway Dance Center. I believe the Broadway Dance Center on 55th Street. Was it
1733 Broadway?
Yeah, that one. And and we're taking a class from Frank, who was a huge influence on me and a huge part of my life as a young dancer. My mom actually used to go in and take class from him once a week, all throughout my childhood. And she would bring him down to teach us at the studio I grew up at, and we would come into New York a lot to take class from him in the summer. So this is us in the summer taking class with him. And,
so, like, tell me about Frank Hatchett. I mean, I know Frank Hatchett, but like, what did he do? What was his way of teaching, his style? What was he known for? He was a very prominent person in the stream of jazz dancing.
Yeah, he was known for a style that he developed called VOP, V-O-P, which I'm sure you could explain better than I could. But, you know, he really mixed a lot of classic jazz style and technique with a lot of, you know, more, I would say, club movement and more, how do I explain it? You know, more, I would say, just movement of the times. It was a very modern day take on a style and also a philosophy. He really was a teacher who didn't just teach choreography. He taught a philosophy of movement and a philosophy of life. And he was very passionate about how dance connected to the kind of person you are and the way that you live your life and the principles that you believe in. And it was a style and a way of being. And I think that you really felt that in his classes. And he was very passionate about teaching people, you know, how to make their lives better with dance and how to be the best that they could be. And I think that I definitely, just the way that his room felt and the way that how passionate he was just absolutely so formative for me as a young dancer. And I think it really informs a lot of the way that I approach my classes now.
Yeah, I mean, Frank was had a nickname of Papa.
Yeah,
everybody called him Papa Frank.
Also, didn't they also call him for a while Dr. Jazz? The Dr. Jazz. Did I make that up?
Maybe. I've known a lot of people call him Papa, but just to talk a little bit about this guy's influence. First of all, he's the one who really made Broadway Dance Center. Prior to that, that whole studio was called JoJo's Dance Factory, run by JoJo Smith. And it was kind of, well, you know, Frank came in, was teaching a little bit, and maybe that was faltering, and it went through another phase. But then Frank sort of came in with this fellow, Richard Elner, who was the businessman. And Frank was just so hot. He would have 4 classes a day in his approach, 4 classes a day. And he would not do the warm-up. He would have other people do the warm-up, and he would go in and do the combination with people. But just to have that amount of dancing in the Frank Hatchett style for must have been 15 years solid in New York. He was just the person in that, like you said, the mix of technique with like street dance sort of things that was going on. And then he would double it because every weekend he was out on the convention circuit. You know, he was teaching everywhere. So, you know, Frank Hatchett's influence on jazz dance and teaching, as you could see, you know, you still feel it in yourself, is just, you know, unspeakable what this guy did. So he really made things. We do have some people watching. We're getting some comments. If people have questions for Al, you can always put those in there. All right. But I can always throw a few things up here when people are making comments on what we're doing here right now.
They were, fun and informative, this gentleman is saying. And yes, because there was such an energy and a vibe, but it was also very serious. You know, he took training very seriously, and he took taking class very seriously, and he didn't mess around in that room. You know, and you mentioned that other people did his warm up, which makes me want to mention another teacher of mine, which was Sheila Barker, who's still teaching at Broadway Dance Center, and I think carrying a lot of the philosophies of Frank. And in my mind, is one of the best teachers in the world. I just think she's absolutely brilliant. But she was a huge influence on me as a young dancer, and continues to be a mentor and friend. Well,
that's funny that you mentioned that, because I bumped into Sheila in Port Authority coming in to teach.
Jersey.
I know her from a while ago, and I told her, "You're next. You're the next interviewer."
Yeah. Oh, that would be fantastic.
So hopefully, within a week or two, we can nail down a time, and we'll have Sheila Barker on too.
Perfect.
To do that. And let's see, do we have one more photo in here? Oh, here you are with
my mom in her dance school, which she had for 44 years, and is now being run by a student of hers.
Great.
44 years of having
44 years. God, she like started the same year I did, because I've been dancing 44 years now.
Yeah, so passionate.
And this photo.
My mom and my dad, when they first met, performing at, I guess, probably one of the first recitals. Yeah.
Wow. Okay.
But the thing that I think was really cool about them and the way that I grew up was that they really stayed connected with a network of people in New York, their teachers and their friends that were teaching dance. Most of them were dance teachers and choreographers, people like Sue Samuels and Jermaine Salzberg and Kathy Sansone, and, you know, just people that were teaching and were passionate about dance. And they really kept in touch with that community. My mom kept taking class at Broadway Dance Center all through her 40s and 50s, and you know, even later. And
I remember bumping into her once at Alvin Ailey's, I think.
Oh yeah, my sister studied there, so I bet that's why she was there. Yeah, she just was obsessed with dance. She still is. She just could never get enough of dance class. So it's, you know, I think it's kind of fun. I'm really proud. It happened naturally, but it sort of makes sense that I now teach dance classes in New York City. You know, it just feels like this thing that was such a huge part of our lives, and it's fun to feel like I'm continuing to pass it on in my own way.
Okay, so as long as we're talking about teaching, we talked a little bit about your choreography, but you teach quite consistently. You're teaching in New York at Steps, correct?
Yes, I teach at Steps twice a week and Broadway Dance Center once a week. And I've been teaching in New York off and on for almost, I was thinking about this morning, for about 13 years.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
Crazy.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's great. Okay. And so in terms of what you want to teach, because you've got sort of, you know, your feet and your roots in this more classic sense, but you certainly are not living in that time period. So like, what are you doing now in your classes to reflect some of the past maybe, but still to become your own person and to make it of today?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think my teachers after everything. Okay?
No, yeah, I thought I hit a button, but I'm okay. Go ahead.
After a certain point, I moved back to New York in my early 20s, and I started taking mostly theater jazz from Andy Blankenbuehler, who was teaching weekly at that time, and Josh Burgas were sort of the two guys that I really studied with pretty heavily. And of course, I fell in love with that style and developed, you know, my vocabulary more towards that kind of jazz dancing. And now the class that I teach is called theater jazz, but I really kind of do what I want in there. I mean, obviously I feel a responsibility to the theater dance community, but the thing that's interesting, of course, as in the last 10 years of teaching, is that what happens on Broadway now is very different. I mean, you don't see classic theater jazz on Broadway right now at all. I can't think of a single show that really isn't pretty based in either a hip hop or a blend of styles, contemporary, modern dance. Even the West Side Story revival, obviously, is being choreographed by a European modern dancer. So, which is wonderful. So in any case, I feel like my responsibility, mostly I teach professional theater dancers, is to, you know, challenge them in various styles. But what I do is my warm up is always set and is very based in, you know, a lot of the classic jazz vocabulary that I've learned, but I also just try to say people's names as much as possible. So in every class, I'll say a name like Matt Maddox, or I'll say a name like Frank Hatchett, or I'll say a name like Doug Caldwell, or I'll say a name like Susie Taylor, or I'll say a name like Jack Cole. I really try to reference these people as much as possible, or Bob Fosse even, just to keep their names alive and to make sure that dancers are, aware of the roots of a lot of this stuff. And that really, like, so much of what I'm doing is inspired by the work of other people. And there are times when I'll say a name and people light up, and there are other times where I say a name and people look at me like I'm crazy. So I am feeling lately as an educator that it is important for me to find a way to continue to pass on history in any way that I can. And in that passion, that history also includes, obviously what happened before the 70s and the 80s. And so I've been trying to do the best that I can to educate myself in really the roots of where it all comes from. But it's a lot to get to people, obviously they want to come and they want to dance. So it's not a history class, obviously. But I do try to just say the names and make references to where the styles come from as much as I can.
Now, you teach a lot on the convention circuit, right? You're going out and doing things. How does that teaching differ from what you're doing in New York?
So different. It's completely different. My job is really, of course, to motivate and inspire, but I'm also teaching musical theater, they call it, on Jump. And so I'm really exposing young dancers to acting and dancing simultaneously. And dancing with a specific intention. And in those classes, I'm talking about people like Bob Fosse and Jerome Robbins and Agnes DeMille to try to help them understand where the history of Broadway dance comes from. So it's a little bit less focused on jazz, a little bit more specifically focused on Broadway and musical theater. And you have an hour to both make them love what you're doing and feel inspired and remember the moves. So it's a lot to pack in, but I'm hoping that, the good thing about social media now is that people can follow you and you can then have a voice and continue to influence them in that way. So
do you think that's something that's kind of missing when you're interacting in that way with that type of student? I mean, do these kids have any exposure to a history of jazz dance?
I think some do, Bob. I do. It's really all dependent upon their teachers and what their teachers are teaching. But I think it's interesting. I was thinking about this, and I don't know how many people even that study ballet really know the history of ballet, or, of course, obviously studying hip hop, the history of hip hop. History is something that I think, unfortunately, tends to come later in education because we're so focused on getting the kids to do things, to learn how to do them, and to do it now, and to feel it and experience it in the now. And so my experience is that a lot of dancers end up coming to the history of it a little bit later because they have questions about where things come from. And so I think the more that we encourage people to ask those questions and be curious about where these styles come from and what happened before us, the better off we'll be. But I do think that there are young people that do have a sense. There absolutely are. And then there are some that don't. It's an interesting conversation because it's somewhat, you need to have a separate class in dance history. There's so much to learn about where these styles come from. It's hard to fit it into a ballet class, a jazz class, a hip hop class. So I think it's up to educators in their dance studios across the country and in the world to find a way to pass on this information.
Well, something I know too, I mean, I've taught many years in universities, and there's always a dance history course that's required. And the amount of jazz or theater dance information within the dance history courses is minimal, even if it's there at all. It's all about ballet. It's all about modern dance. The history of an African-derived style going into theater is just not there. So you can graduate with your BFA in dance and still not be informed of this style, of where the roots are, who the important people were, and there are some schools who do it. Now, I know, like up at the University of Buffalo, Tom Ralabate, he's got a very strong program in that. So it's not every school, but there are just like a lot of missing information. I can tell you, and this goes way back, but I had my graduate study at NYU, taking from Deborah Jowett, who's a very well-known big,
yes, I work,
critic and person, and I had dance history from her, and there was, out of the entire semester, was one day spent on jazz and theater style, and she didn't do it. She had to have somebody else come in and do it. This fellow Joe Nash came in and did it. So it was, you know, you got to have an hour and 20 minutes out of an entire semester to cover everything that we do. So it's just not there.
So many people do. I mean, jazz dance is so alive. It's so many people do it. So it's it's not like it's an obscure art form, you know. I mean, in some forms, obviously jazz dance has many forms, and what people consider jazz dance is a controversial question. You know, there are many different things that people put under the umbrella of jazz dance. And that's wonderful, but there are many people participating in this community. So it's unfortunate that it's not more encouraged in college programs. I think that is changing, though. I do think that is changing, especially because the amount of dancers now that are coming from dance studios and not conservatories and going in to study dance in college has really grown quite a bit. You know, most of the kids in these programs are coming from the dance convention world, or they're coming from dance studios where they took a lot of jazz dance. So they're going to have questions, I think.
Well, and I think it's good for dancers to know that. I think that's something that sets them apart. You know, if you talk to a group of dancers and the three people who says, oh, yes, I know who Luigi is. I know this. I know where this happened. You know, you just see them as a more informed person as to somebody who's like, you know, what, because I always ask people, did you study a particular jazz dance technique? And almost invariably, they'll just say, you know, we just kind of warmed up and danced. And, you know, that leads you to sort of a perception of maybe what you're going to get with them.
I'm sure.
As a dancer, if that's what they're doing. Okay. All right. So that could bring me to something else. You know, we're talking about what students need. You know, what do aspiring jazz dancers need to do? What do they need to study? What concepts should they develop in their bodies? Is there something that you see, you know, could be a little bit better? What can you offer in terms of that?
I can only offer my own perspective based on my own work and what I include in my choreography and my work. But I think there is absolutely important and vital to have a strong sense of plie and being grounded into the floor, which I find a connection to the floor, resistance to the floor, that I find missing in a lot of dancers, and footwork and syncopation, timing, syncopation, and footwork, that I find is also sometimes shockingly challenging for people who are professional dancers. So I think that there are some gaps in training there. I don't know whether that's in the kind of jazz that they're working on, or whether that is, you know, like whether shift of weight has become less important. But I also think it could be that people are studying tap dance less frequently. I'm not sure. I don't know how you know, when I was growing up, it was like ballet, tap, and jazz. Like that's what you studied in the dance studio. We studied ballet, tap, and jazz. And I find that it feels like a little bit more like an elective now, or a specialty skill. So, you know, those are the things that I think are absolutely so important, that I think are important. But I'm sure there are other choreographers that have different opinions about what they think are important.
Okay. All right. This is something, it looks like you're presenting it at steps, but like, what are the qualities in the dancers right now? Like if you were going to critique the dancers and give them notes or give them ideas, what would you be looking for?
Well, there's a lot of change in speed in this piece, and a lot of just attention to detail, right? And a lot of use of plie, like all those little triplets, passes. Most of this lives in plie. There's a really strong sense of connection to the floor. There's a sense of really razor sharp focus. And obviously this piece is very much influenced by the work of Fosse, both with the fact that they're wearing the black derbies, that there's 3 of them, you know, that it's very detailed movement. But I also, you know, I didn't really study the Fosse technique. I've just, you know, of course, felt inspired by his work. And I wanted to kind of create my own sort of modern day homage to that style. But that was sort of an experiment. It was like, can I take these black derbies, which are such a symbol of classic New York, I like to think New York, but really anywhere, theater, jazz, and can I put them to really modern contemporary music, and what does that do? And how do people respond to that? Because there's really not much that's new about this movement. It's just sort of the context that you present it in. And of course, I think the dancers are pretty extraordinary.
Well, that's exactly like what I'm talking about. And you basically just said that. You're looking at something that's a little bit more classic, a little bit more like it's been done before, but you're reimagining it for a different time and for a different use.
Right. And
so
and it's absolutely people's response to it. They respond to it like it's something brand new, you know, which is so amazing. It's so amazing because, I mean, that's the definition of classic, right? It's timeless, and I'm just so always so thrilled to see young people responding to things that are really classic, and they do, you know, they do. Young people. They'll think something's cool if you tell them it's cool, you know. They really will. They're so open and they're so willing, and I think that this stuff is never going to die, this kind of movement. So it's fun to be able to pass it on, and I, you know, as I find myself in a position of being in front of a lot of young people, I do feel a responsibility to continue to pay tribute to the people who are responsible for so much of this movement.
Okay. So now, from being around a while now in the business, I'm sure you have a sense of, you know, things that are tough to do, things that you would like to do. So like, what is the future? Or like, where are things going right now? Because we had a big push into the television dance within the last 15 years or so. And that certainly steered things in a certain way. But like, is there something you see that's out there in the future as to where we might be going?
Well, obviously, Bob, social media, Instagram, TikTok is really the place where people are seeing dance now. They're really, that's where they're getting their information, more so than I think on television. So they're on their phones all day long and they're watching short clips, which is partly why I created that piece we just watched, was because I wanted to create something that people could watch in that format, right? So I do think that's going to continue being popular. The thing that's tricky about that, Bob, is that it's a constant stream of new content. So everyone's just constantly creating something new. Even myself, I can make a video like that, and a week later it's disappeared, it's gone, because 5,000 other dance videos have taken its place. So it's kind of mind-boggling. And the thing that's frustrating about that to me is that it doesn't leave a lot of room for history. It's always about what the new thing, constantly new content, new content, new content. So what do we do about that? I do think that there will be a continual interest in history. I do believe that. I think I'm feeling it myself. I feel so overwhelmed by the amount of new content and how fast things are moving that I feel the need to look back and figure out how we got here. That's my own personal opinion. I also think that things happening in real time, in rooms, real life experiences are going to become, I think, more valued and more important as we continue to be on our phones all the time. So creating workshops, classes that are happening in real time with live music, you know, in the flesh is really the future as far as I'm concerned. And really where I want to put my energy is being in rooms with people and, you know, taking 2 or 3 hours to just dance. I mean, in some ways it makes dance all the more important because it's one of the few times that we can really feel fully present with other people there.
So maybe this is an example of what you're talking about. What is this?
So this is a piece that I created. It was, I called it like a pop-up Halloween experience, but it was basically a Halloween show. We did it for 4 nights at Steps late. So the shows were the week of Halloween leading up to Halloween, and they were like 11:30 at night. They were late shows. And they were Halloween themed, and people showed up. They got tickets in advance. They got the address of where the show was going to be the day of, and all their phones were checked at the door. So no one was allowed to have a phone in the room. And it was just we presented it in the round for groups of about like 49 people per show. And it featured some of in my opinion, some of the best dancers, jazz theater dancers in New York City. In a variety of ages and from a variety of places. But it was a very special experience. And I think what I loved about it was that, you know, you had to be there to experience it. And people felt like it was something special. So I want to continue to figure out how to make things like that will bring people together in real time. And then eventually also maybe hopefully it start to include more of a focus on history and the people that came before me. I think people need to know who Frank Hatchett were, and I think they need to know who Doug Caldwell was, and of course people before that. But those are the people that I feel passionately about, because those are the people that I really feel like are the reason I'm here.
Okay. So with those ideas in your mind, like where do you see yourself in the future? What do you want to be doing 5 or 10 years from now?
Yeah, I'm really, I think if I have a greatest accomplishment so far in my life, it's the community of people I've built in my classes. I feel really proud of. No matter what job I've gone off and done or what show I've gone off to choreograph, I've always come back to teaching my class. And I feel very connected to the New York dance community, and I feel very passionate about just sort of what I've started and continued from what other people have started that I've just continued, really. So I'd like to continue to figure out what I can do with that role and what I can do, take my class. And so similar with Norma, that show, the Halloween show, was an extension kind of class, because a lot of those people that came were people that take class. And it was another way for us all to be together. And in a city like New York, it's important to be together.
Yeah,
not just in class and not just in auditions. So I'd like to continue to develop that community and what I can do for that community and within that community. So that's, beyond that, I don't know. Of course, I love telling stories through dance, and I'll always do that. But these days I'm feeling really connected to being an educator as well.
Okay. All right. Is there anything that we didn't cover? Is there any little special bit of advice that you can offer to people who may be watching?
I will say one last thing, which is that I've been studying this mathematics technique with you, Bob, once a week for the last 8 or 9 weeks we've been doing it.
Yeah.
And it's just incredible how new everything feels by studying something from the past, how everything to me now suddenly feels so new and fresh and exciting. And that, yes, it's exciting to have the new hot thing and to know the new hot thing, but to look back at what's happened before can sometimes be all the more revolutionary. So I encourage people to continue to think about the past.
I agree. I always tell that, and in my writings, I say, there's so much richness in the past, and don't discard that just because it was from a while ago. And you can really find, like repurposing it in an old piece of furniture. You can find something great, you fix it up, you change it, and then you've got something that's really special because it's not of today. It's from a long time ago that is now have a new life to it.
100%.
So that's great. There's one thing in here because there's somebody who wants to say something to you.
That is one of my very, very closest, dearest friends, Danielle, who I met at a dance convention when we were teenagers, and now we call her the mayor of my dance class.
Okay.
And she just had her first little daughter named Una.
Oh, Uncle Al.
Yeah, she's the mayor of New York Theater Jazz, basically, Bob. I'm sure you'll meet her eventually. The only reason she's coming to our mathematics classes is because she's breastfeeding.
Okay.
Probably right now.
All right. Well, that's a great interview, Al. Thank you. Thank you for your information. And, there are people watching, but this will go out. I'm sure a lot more people will watch this as it's archived, and hopefully they'll benefit from this information.
I'll certainly do my best to share it. And thank you so much for having me.
No problem. Okay. Thank you. And I'll see you in a few days.
Okay. Bye, Bob.
All right. You hang in there for a second. I'm going to remove you from the stream. All right. So that was our interview with Al Blackstone. And I think he's somebody who's really unique in today's world, in that he's not totally from the past, but he's got some influences from the past in terms of jazz dance, but he's really reinventing it for the future. And he's really described how you can do that, how you can take this rich well of what's in jazz dance and make it something really special for today. So I'm very happy that he was able to be here. So that's our show for today. I'm Bob Boross. This is my jazz and tap dance life. And we are doing these interviews just about every week, every 10 days or so, in addition to all of the other things I have my channel with jazz dance instruction, tap dance instruction, videos on the masters, mathematics, Luigi, many more people, etc. So please check out those videos. You can subscribe to the channel, click that notifications bell so that you'll know when we do new videos. It's really good if you click like, because that tells YouTube it's good information and that other people should be hearing that information too. So that's our broadcast for today. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.